Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlin. We certainly all want our kids to grow up happy and reach their potential, and resilience is the one thing we know they need. So how do you build resilience in your kids so they can bounce back from the stresses of life? Child psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders is here with a 4-step process. So thanks for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, Kara.
I mean, the truth is we all face trauma and adversity, right? No one is immune from that.
No one is immune from that. However, in the past, we've talked about helicopter parenting or lawnmower parenting. If you mow down all of the barriers, all of the difficult experiences, if you hover over and, pluck your child out of every conflict or every difficulty, they don't learn the skills to manage these things. And these are life skills. They're not just childhood skills.
Yeah. So building resistance is something that we can do. It's not something that, hey, you're just born that way. Some people are more resilient than others.
I do think that some people, some young people are more resilient than others. There is aspects of temperament. In adults, we call it personality. In children, we call it temperament. There are aspects of temperament around frustration tolerance and problem solving, and, attention and concentration and focus and all those things that are aspects of problem solving. So yes, temperament does play a role. However, that doesn't mean that you can't build resilience, right? Resilience is that bouncing back. It's that process of adapting in the face of adversity or trauma or tragedy or threats. And there's, these days, we've just been sort of still in the last stages of a global pandemic. That's a lot of stress. And, there are family and relationship issues that happen as well.
So we talked about a 4-step process, or we should say the 4 core components you say to build resilience: connection, wellness, healthy thinking, and meaning. So let's start with connection. What does that mean?
We've talked about this before. It's prioritizing relationships. We are social creatures, and we need to prioritize relationships. That could be family relationships, that could be friendships, that could be extended family relationships, that could be relationships with your teachers or your school support personnel. It's building relationships, and by building relationships and strengthening connections, other people can provide support, validation, mirroring. And that can really help us feel better. Certainly faith-based groups, volunteer opportunities, all those things that allow you to feel connected. And, it's because being connected is thinking outside of yourself, right? So now you're not just caught up in your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own feelings. You're now with someone else. And so you're thinking about, well, I'm sharing this. How does that make that other person feel? Or, boy, that other person shared a similar experience to me. They might have some understanding if I share my experience. So it really builds this sense of connectivity.
And I think the tricky thing is the line for parents about when to step in. I want to go back to, you said we're kind of depriving our kids of learning the skill of resilience when we step in. So let's say your child comes home and they're like, I had the worst day ever. My teacher was so mean to me, or these kids were so mean to me. What should we be saying if we want to build resilience?
So I would certainly ask some open-ended questions. What happened? How did that make you feel? I would do some reflective listening. Boy, that sounds like it was a difficult experience. It sounds like you felt left out. I mean, reflect in your listening and provide some validation. But reflecting and validating is different than fixing. Now, unless it's something seriously egregious, and in circumstances like this, I do like to take into account the validity of the historian, right? If you know your child is a chronic exaggerator, or they frequently misperceive what's happening, you can still provide some support and validation. In certain circumstances, you might want to ask if something happened in school or something happened with a teacher that seems maybe borderline egregious. You might want to check in with the teacher. Like, my child says this happened. I just wanted to get your perspective, right? That's not accusing. That's not saying my child said you did X and that's unacceptable, right? We're not accusing anyone. We're asking open-ended questions. We're being curious and non-judgmental. So again, based on how serious it is, you can get other inquiry, but sometimes providing just some support, some validation, some reflective listening, and not fixing it.
Okay, the not fixing, I think, is the hard part, right? So even if you don't call the teacher, but we tend to say, well, if I were you, I would do A, B, and C. We shouldn't do that?
Well, you can say, well, if that situation were to happen again tomorrow, what do you think you would do differently? Because honestly, I mean, a lot of times they don't want to hear what we would do.
Yeah.
But I want them to problem solve. So I wonder if it happened again tomorrow, what you could do, how you could manage it, what you could do differently, what you might do the same. Maybe you would, based on the situation, maybe you would handle it exactly the same. And if they say, I'm going to do the same thing, okay, but it might give you the same feeling afterward. And look how you are right now. You're upset, angry, frustrated, disappointed, whatever it is. So the more you can allow them to come up with some solutions, and I might say, well, I have an idea. Do you want to hear it? No, I don't want to hear your idea. Okay, well, let me know. I have an idea on how to handle this differently. If you want to know, just ask me. So I'm offering it, but they have to work for it a little bit.
Okay, versus like, if you don't listen to my idea, I'm taking your phone away.
Exactly.
Okay, so we really do have to, and it's true, if we look back on our relationship, I do think, I know you like to say, we always say, oh, not the good old days, but I think we had a lot more freedom. Our parents didn't know as much, maybe because they couldn't text us and track us, and there was no power school when I was growing up. I mean, so like you really just had to fix things more. Your parents didn't really know what was going on as much as we could now if we want to. So I guess we did have those skills, and it's so easy now to like get an alert on your phone that your child has a failing grade because they didn't turn in their
missing assignment.
Yeah, and you're like, let me text them right now, turn in that assignment. I mean, so we I guess have to resist the temptation to be the manager and the fixer.
Yes, and it's hard because, as I always say, parenting's the hardest job in the world. And we become parents because we want to guide, support, educate, instill values, right? We want to do things. Parenting is an active process when it's done reasonably well, not a passive process. However, when you look at the developmental spectrum, you're more active in the beginning, and then over time, as they reach each developmental stage, you actually need to be a little less active. And that's hard because you get good at being active and intervening, and then you have to dial it back, which is hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we have to practice. Okay, so as these 4 components, the next component of building resilience, which is a skill we're learning, is wellness. And this means we really have to take care of our body and our nutrition and our sleep so that we feel more resilient when stress happens.
You and I talk about this all the time. The low-hanging fruit in mood and energy and overall well-being is sleep and nutrition. Finding ways, and sometimes even when you create good habits, like you go to bed on time and you're getting up at a regular time, sometimes for whatever reason, something's on your mind, you have a nightmare, you don't sleep well. So when you have a pattern of several days of not sleeping well, you're more irritable, you're less able to focus, you're tired, you're not thinking clearly, you're cranky. So then we have to come up with a strategy. Do we need to go to bed a little earlier? Do we look at, okay, well, it's been hard for you to fall asleep. Have you had enough time outside or enough active time? Because when young children are passive all day long, it doesn't wear them out, right? The old adage with a toddler is, when they've had an active day is, oh goodness, they're going to sleep well tonight, right? Because activity does burn energy. It actually allows you to think more clearly. It does so many good things for you. And nutrition is also important. I do like to take into consideration that schools often now provide at least 2 meals a day for kids, so they should be getting some basic nutrition, even for those who exist in sort of various socioeconomic groups and might not have enough, food, doing what we can to provide basic nutrition and decent sleep is what helps affect our ability to function and therefore solve problems.
Yeah, and I think we understand that as adults too. We know the days that we haven't slept well, or if we were up all night with the kids, we're not going to handle criticism very well the next day, or we're not going to feel like eating well. I mean, it can be a vicious cycle. So making room for that. The other thing is healthy thinking, you say. That's number 3. Healthy thinking matters to build resilience. So how do you teach that?
It's listening to your children's statements and then kind of addressing it. So when you hear kids say, I hate myself, or I'm terrible at everything, or I'm stupid, or, those really negative self-statements, those are often reflective of, what our child feels about themselves. So trying to, shift some of their thinking. And it's not like, I don't necessarily endorse showering your child with compliments because it comes off as not necessarily being genuine or meaningful, or they say, oh, well, you're just giving me a compliment because you have to, because you're my parent. It's looking at ways to keep things in perspective. So instead of I'm stupid or I'm terrible at math, it's you had trouble with this recent math test. Are there other things about math that you are good at? Well, I am good at long division. Okay, so you're good at long division. So that doesn't mean that you're terrible at math. It means that you had problems with fractions or, whatever it might be. So really looking at these global negative self-statements that kids sometimes make and actually being careful that we as adults are not making those statements about ourselves, right? Oh, I'm terrible at this, or I can never do this, or, I just feel so dumb all the time. Whatever negative self-statements we're engaging in, it's really sort of identifying that when you engage in those negative self-statements, it only serves to make you feel worse about yourself. So it's really making some adaptations to that. It's also having a growth and a change mindset. Mm-hmm. Things do not stay the same. You might have a beautiful second grade year with a second grade teacher that's well suited to you. And then your third grade teacher, it might not be as good a fit. And you didn't really want to leave second grade, and now you're in third grade and you hate third grade and you hate all the work in third grade. So it's creating a growth and a change mindset. You don't stay in the same grade every year. You don't stay with the same teacher. Sometimes you change friend groups. And so it's being open as a parent and saying, it's hard to change sometimes, but tell me one new friend that you made in your class this year, or tell me one thing that you learned in a subject that made you feel good about yourself, right? So it's embracing that growth and that change mindset.
Yeah. And be prepared when sometimes they say nothing. I didn't learn anything. I didn't have anything good happen today. I mean, I'll do that at dinner. Like, let's talk about the good and the bad. And sometimes you get a really nice time and then you say nothing good happened today. And they don't want to really hear it that, well, the sun came out.
Right. And you come up with those sort of benign things, right? And I can, you can share a negative thing with a positive thing. You don't have to just be a Pollyanna and have all positive things.
Right, like
you
highs
can say,
and lows, but
yeah, I mean, whatever it is, right? You got to wear your favorite sneakers today, or whatever it is. Have something that that you can accept. It's planting the seeds of creating gratitude. I don't suggest emphasizing gratitude when your child's in a negative mood, because it's not going to go over well.
Okay, so that's an important thing, is we sometimes are hearing so much about gratitude, and if the kids are like, I just had the worst day, and you're like, you should be grateful that you have a house over your head and there's a warm dinner in front of you. Like, right. Don't bother. Like, this is a time, and that would be a time that you would instead just reflect, and it sounds like you're really feeling low.
Sounds like you had a crappy day today. Mm-hmm. We all have crappy days. Mm-hmm.
And not try to fix.
Well, I mean, you could say,
no,
is there anything good?
But like, rather than,
okay.
Yeah.
I hear it was a crappy day. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened. What's one thing you could go do now that would be kind to yourself? You want to go take a break?
What's going to make you feel better now? What can you do right now, right? So that's creating that, do you want to go out and play? Do you want to call a friend? Do you want to do, what do you want to do? again, that's building, coming inward, building that. What can you do to help yourself? Not me as the parent. I mean, you can make a snack. Sometimes a little snack makes you feel better too, but what can you do to help yourself? Relying on that inner resiliency.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is something, of course, we all want to teach. You mentioned temperament. I think for some kids, and we've talked about kids who are not neurotypical, let's say they're on the spectrum or they have ADHD, but that creates a lot of overwhelm or low frustration tolerance, and it seems like everything gets them prickled, or they're just a real sensitive kid. Everything overwhelms them. What do you do when it seems like they're just harder to regulate themselves?
Well, that's a segment in and of itself. So when we talk about emotion regulation, we know, like as parents, as caregivers, as teachers, as mental health professionals, we know that there are certain kids that have really poor emotion regulation. They have a hard time regulating their emotions. They're really angry, or they're really happy, or they're really upset, right? They have a really hard time regulating those emotions. In those circumstances, you know that your child has a tendency to do those things. So it's not, having them be perfectly even in their mood at all times is not a realistic goal. It's more realistic that they catch themselves when they're in that more intense mood state and figure out a way to dial it back. Mm-hmm. Better yet, they know that, that you've talked about, and they know their patterns. So they know that they tend to cycle up or cycle down in terms of mood, and to try to catch it, when you're on the upswing or when you're on the downswing, because when you're at your peak and when you're at your trough, it's a hard time to fix it. So I think self-knowledge is really important in those mm-hmm. situations. Like, what sets, to your kids, especially as kids get into their teen years, they know what sets them off.
Yeah.
And, trying to, missing a snack sets them off, missing sleep they know some of the things that set them off, and trying to be a little bit more preventive.
Okay, yeah, so teaching this and understanding, how much of it is true when people say, oh, that's just a teenager, they're always moody? Is that true?
Well, there is some truth to that. However, moodiness or increased need for isolation or irritability is somewhat typical. However, I don't want it to go to an extreme. Like, my child hasn't left their room in 3 days, mm-hmm. right? That's especially, as we get into the summer when there's less to do for older kids. There's more camps and other kinds of activities for younger kids. I don't want anything to get to an extreme. The guideline I use is if it hinders their functioning. If it hinders their functioning, that they're not participating in any family events. They haven't come out for dinner in 2 weeks. They haven't, they've stopped connecting with friends. They haven't even played a video game in a long time, right? When it starts to be a little bit to the extreme, it hinders their functioning in some way, that's when it's more concerning.
And that's when you might want to seek help, and you give that 2-week framework, because I think sometimes we get really reactive when we see them getting super angry or super emotional, or they won't come out of their room, and it's a day. But that might be okay if it's a day.
Yeah, we all have bad days. We all have a bad couple days, but anything beyond 2 or 3 days, I would be more concerned. And I would, is there something I can do to support you? What can you do to help yourself? I need you to come out of your room for at least an hour a day, two different times. Doesn't have to be at the same time, right? You have to, start providing some carrots, not literal carrots, but carrot on a stick.
You come out, I give you a cupcake. No.
Something, whatever motivates them. But I would be concerned about, more extremes in isolation or irritability, withdrawal from activities that were previously pleasurable, withdrawal from like friends. Mm-hmm. I get more concerned when it's a protracted period of time, but anyone can have a bad day or bad couple days.
Yeah, yeah. And so the important thing that we're trying to teach, and I know you said this before in a previous CURES episode, which had always stuck with me, is that, they've studied like what creates success. And it didn't matter as much where you came from, how much your parents made, any of that. What mattered was grit. So resilience and grit, like that's one of the, if we want to teach our kids anything, like this is a really important life skill.
Yeah, and it's digging deep into those inner resources. It's knowing that, I think a good metaphor for this, and this is for like older folks, older teens, but like the aspect of driving, right? What makes the prospect of your teen, your 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, learning to drive is because driving is 100, if not 1,000 different problems that come up that you need to find a way to solve. Now, this is different for a 10-year-old, but it's the metaphor. And it's the only way that you learn to, you're making a left-hand turn and there's oncoming traffic and there doesn't seem to be a break and you're not at a right. What's your thinking in these situations? I'll wait for a break, or I need a 2-second break in between cars, or 3-second break in between cars. That, you're learning to think things through. And the only way that you do that is by experiencing it. You can't sit behind a driving simulator because it'll never come up the same way as driving in real life. So the metaphor is you need to experience some things in order to develop that resiliency, that grit that kind of pushes you through to deal with adversity, to deal with problems, to deal with conflicts, or face significant sources of stress.
So I like it, bring it back. I can imagine the moms, if anyone's like me, I have a driver who's going to be a driver for real in a month. And so even just sitting there, it's also an analogy for parents. Like, why am I gripping that thing that you hold on to that you're supposed to hang your dry cleaning on?
Or pressing the brake, pressing the imaginary brake in the passenger seat. My daughter, I still press that imaginary brake in the passenger seat. And she's like, there's no brake there. I'm like, I know there is, but it's a reflex.
It's a reflex. So, I mean, that's an instance. And like, I'll confess, I've lost it in a car. We're like, what are you doing? And you want to just like stop it. Like, I'll just drive home. But we can't. We have to let them learn. They actually need to drive a certain number of hours in their permit before they can get their license. Like, we have to allow this to happen. That's part of them becoming drivers. So when things like that are happening, I guess, and we're flinching as parents, how do we take care of ourselves in that moment so we don't rush to either fix it or stop it or let them experience it, I guess?
Well, to follow this metaphor, I mean, that's why you do some driving with your child, with guidance. That's the support and the values. We let people get in front of us. We're not cutting people off and swearing at people, right? You're instilling your values. You're doing some of that guidance. Sometimes it's better that other people do that guidance as well, because it comes off differently when it's other people, right? You have to go to driving school. And then there's an amount of learning, no matter how many times we go over different scenarios in driving, it's when you're on your own and the scenario came up that didn't happen with your parents and didn't happen in driving school. To follow the metaphor, you have to figure it out yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes things go wrong. I mean, I told both my kids, I know that there will be some type of, hopefully, minor fender bender in the first year. It's extremely common, so we're not going to stress over it. That's why they get old cars. But it's anticipating that there will be a problem, because then I want them to come to me. I don't want, I've dealt with situations where a child got into an accident or got a big ticket and then they kept it from the parents and then the ticket wasn't paid. Now small problems are best dealt as small problems, or else they become bigger problems. Yeah. So I'm using driving as the metaphor, yeah. But it kind of is a good metaphor to look at, how you instill your values, how you provide some teaching, support, and education. Sometimes you have other people do it, right? Teachers, coaches, other people. But ultimately, the learning takes place when you're on your own. And hopefully you can fall back on those other experiences.
Right. Get in a car that's old with a lot of steel around it. Okay. Yeah, so no, that's a great metaphor, and I think, and just to review of what we're talking about, the 4 principles of resilience: connection, wellness, healthy thinking, and creating meaning. So these are things that develop over time, right? I mean, I think sometimes we get worried about our kids, but I remember one thing you also said to me that stuck was like 3 months is a really long time in a kid's life. So they might have really sound like they're really down, they don't like their friends, they hate school, you're hearing that every day, yet they're still going, they're still whatever, but like they might be totally different people in 3 months. They can learn a lot of skills in 3 months, where adults were like thinking, oh gosh, this is it.
Right, and getting additional collaborative information, right? checking with the teacher, like, my child's really irritable. What are you seeing in school? Oh, they seem actually fine in school. That's information. So that's information to me that, I talk about the 3 spheres of a child's life: home, school, and, friends and social. So they might be miserable at home, but they're keeping it together in school. They're active, they're participating, they seem to be on task. Okay, well, that's good information for me. So I'm not going to worry so much. They can have their kind of irritability at home because I know that they're able to manage in other settings, or I've seen them with friends, or I've seen them playing sports. They seem pretty happy there. So it's really looking at things within a context, and not just, this is the whole of their experience, because it's not.
Yeah, yeah. And praise. Never underestimate the power of praise. So how would we use praise to build resilience?
Praise is best done not necessarily open-ended. So there's actually ways that you're supposed to give a compliment, right? So to say, oh, Kara, you're super, or you're great, or, I mean, it's like, well, no, I'm not that great. Like, why are you saying that? That you give praise or compliments in very specific ways, right? Your young child colored something and you can say, oh, this is the most beautiful painting I've ever seen, or the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen. What you say is, you look at that. You really blended red and blue and green together very nicely in that, right? You're giving very specific pieces of information because that shows that you're paying attention, right? Your child was playing soccer, lacrosse, softball. It's not, you were great today. It's, I saw you pitch those 2 innings and you had a lot of strikes in those 2 innings, whatever it is. You passed well to your teammate. You're giving specific information that is harder to reject because, well, I did pass to my teammate, so that is true. Or I did use red and green and yellow in my drawing. You're giving specific information. So instead of saying great and fabulous and all these kind of general complimentary things that are very easy to reject, and trying to stay away from physical appearances. You're beautiful, you're this and you're that. It's, your eyes sparkle when you talk about playing lacrosse, or when you were talking about your math assignment, you really looked confident, right? That you give praise not just through physical or general superlatives, but in much more specific ways.
So if you saw your child do something like get back on track, you would praise that. Like, I know that was a really hard day for you. I really like how you decided to go for a walk. Like, as far as, rather than fixing it, we could look for, are they doing a coping skill? And that would build resilience as far as what we can do.
Yes. So you're giving, the greatest gift you give your children is your time and attention. So that's attention that you're giving them to say, I noticed that you did this, right? And it made me, I felt happy when I saw you go for a walk because I saw that it made you feel better when you came back, right? You're giving that information as opposed to just general superlatives.
We're out of time for this episode, but thank you for helping us build a little resilience. We'll have to remember not to fix everything. Thank you, Dr. Laura Saunders from the Institute of Living in Hartford. And thank you, everyone, for being here. If you want more information on the cutting edge of wellness, follow me on social media at Kara Sundlin. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.